forget you, Barbara.
Ever played Skin the Cat?
Someone's in the back seat! Tell me where you are, John!
Wolfman's got Nards!
Hi guys, my name's Barry and welcome back to the channel. For a preparation for the Urban Legend fan film that I'm doing in 2023, I decided to watch a few movies that are based on urban legends. So I decided not to go into the original When a Stranger Calls from 1979. What I wanted to do was look at the updated versions from 2006 and see how they went with that one. Now I know that people don't like the 2006 version simply because it's a remake, but I think that's what makes this movie underrated, is because when you're critiquing a film like When a Stranger Calls from 2006, you're automatically comparing it to its superior original When a Stranger Calls, and I think that's quite unfair to do that, because you do have some positives and of course negatives for all films, and if you're trying to critique a film and you're just comparing it to an original, most of the time it will fail. But if you pretend that the 2006 remake is not an actual remake but a movie in itself, then I think you will find more positives than you will negatives if you're ignoring the original. And that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to critique the 2006 remake as its own movie and forget that the original existed. In this movie you've got a girl called Jill Johnson who she's got a couple of friends that were introduced to. We've got her friend Tiffany and her other friend Valkyrie, who we don't really know too much about. They're only in a couple of scenes just to build some character development for when we possibly may use them later on in the movie. We're also introduced to Jill's dad as well, played by Agent Coulson, and he's telling her that she went over her phone bill by 800 minutes, so she's grounded for the month. She's not getting her car or her phone back for the rest of the month. Now that is a bit of a foreshadowing as well, because we automatically think that she might need her car at some point, or at least she might need her mobile phone at some point. Because she doesn't have her car, her dad needs to drive her to a house that she will be babysitting a couple of kids in. She doesn't know them personally, she doesn't know the family, she's just replying to an emergency ad for a babysitter job, and she goes to this lake house somewhere. It's a big massive modern, I wouldn't say mansion, but it's a huge house set on the lake. Before we're introduced to these characters, it's set 125 or so miles away at this fairground where this oil is being drummed out as well. So there's a lot of noise around this little area, and there's a house right at the fairground, and we see someone coming in and what looks to be killing the babysitter and the kids in the house. When the police arrive, they see that there's lots of bodies around, and I don't know why they do this, but they mentioned that they couldn't find a weapon at the scene, and they make it quite known that a weapon wasn't used. I don't know why they've done that. If there was something that they mentioned later on in the film about the killer just using his fists, then I would understand that, but that is the only time they mention it, as if it's something significant, when in actual fact it's not significant. If we look at Jill's two friends, Tiffany and Valkyrie, a little bit closer, Valkyrie seems to be the level-headed friend, but there's not much going on with her. She's just that level-headed friend that everyone needs. Whereas Tiffany, she's a little bit more mysterious, because Tiffany and Jill have kind of fell out because Tiffany kissed Jill's boyfriend, or I can assume that it's her boyfriend or someone that she's seen, and Tiffany's obviously went behind her back and kissed him. After we've established the characters and Jill goes off to this house to babysit, we also find out that her friends, as well as Bobby, are going to this sort of Wicker Man festival where there's not a lot of signal. When Jill goes into the house and she gets introduced to the house and all the gadgets around the house, oddly the parents don't introduce Jill to the kids that she's supposed to be babysitting that night. I find that quite bizarre, because you would think that the kids would need to know who's going to be watching them, just in case they wake up and get a fright during the night when there's this strange girl babysitting them. So I found that quite weird. It's almost like there was no kids in the house and they were going to go this house of the devil route where there is no kids that they're babysitting. They're not babysitting anyone. Obviously it doesn't do that. I just found it quite weird. The mum also mentions there's a woman living on the third floor. She's just renting a room, and her name's Rosa. We don't see much or hear much about Rosa other than the fact that she's living there. I find it bizarre that she doesn't maybe ask Rosa to watch the kids, but she's also got a teenage son that lives sometimes in the guest house across the way, and he's sometimes there, he's sometimes not, but they're obviously only setting that up because we think someone might be in the guest house. After the parents go away, Jill starts to hear some strange noises that can be explained from the birds in this botanic garden style thing that they've got inside the house, and we also see Rosa as well feeding the birds, so that explains some of the strange noises that Jill's hearing around the house. I mean, then we also start to get introduced to the phone calls that are made, but we find out that sometimes the phone calls that were made were by Bobby's friends just pranking Jill, but other times it's just someone breathing down the phone. There is a really pointless scene that I don't quite understand. Well, I understand why they've done it, but I don't quite understand why they should have put it in there. And that's when Tiffany comes over to see Jill. She doesn't really come over for anything. She just comes over and they explain to the audience that Tiffany was seeing Bobby before Jill came onto the scene, but before Tiffany and Bobby could become a thing, Jill kinda took Bobby away and Tiffany never got her chance, and she said to her, that's the reason that I kissed Bobby, because I never got that chance and that was it. And that seems to be the only reason why they were there. Other than that, it was probably just to give us a body count, because the movie does consist of a very low body count, and Tiffany was one of those bodies later on. And I think they also tried to let us know that the garage door, or the garage door, was open, and that's how Tiffany got into the house. But apart from that, she was just in to say hello and then leave again. After Tiffany leaves and disappears, this is when the movie starts to pick up, because throughout the film it is quite a slow burn where she's on the phone constantly, and we're constantly, as the audience, looking in the background to see if we can see anything. We never really do. We think we're going to see something and we don't, and I think that's quite smart from the filmmakers, because it makes us think that we're going to see something behind her, when in actual fact we see nothing, until again Tiffany leaves and the phone calls get worse, and the killer is then, or the caller is then telling her that he can see her, and that's when she panics and calls the police again, letting the police know that this guy who's phoning me can actually see me. So the police decide, you know what, try and keep him on the phone for at least a minute so we can trace the call, so that we can find out where he is, and then we can investigate it further. And she's like, okay, I'll do that. But the caller seems to be quite smart, because he seems to hang up just before the minute mark. Jill does see someone moving around the guest house, and she phones the guest house to see if it's the son that's there, but no one answers. So she decides to leave the kids in the house, lock it up, and go across to the guest house to see if he's there, as in the son. Nobody's there, but the phone rings in the guest house, and she manages to keep the caller on the phone for over a minute. But unfortunately for her, the guest house line is different from the main line from the main house, so she doesn't quite get the chance to find out where he is. As she's in the guest house, she sees a light going on into Rosa's room, and she finds out that Rosa is still in the house, even though she disappeared in the house earlier on. So she goes back to the house again, goes up to Rosa's room, and I find this quite bizarre, because she doesn't shout Rosa, and she shouldn't really be 100% worried that Rosa's not there, but the shower is on. She goes into the shower room and opens the shower curtain. Can you imagine if Rosa was there naked having a shower? Anyway, she wasn't there obviously, and this is when we see Tiffany lying there dead. At this point the movie does pick up more pace, and she also manages to keep the caller on the phone in the main house for over a minute, so that gives the police a chance to track them. And even though we know the premise of the movie and we know what the police are about to say to Jill, we still kind of get chills when they phone her back to tell her,
We traced the call. It's coming from inside the house. Do you hear me? It's coming from inside the house.
She obviously gets into a panic, and she goes back to check the kids again after checking them earlier on, but this time they're not there, and she thinks maybe the caller or the killer has taken them, but they were also just hiding. When she pulls them out to get them, to try and get them to safety, that's when the caller / killer reveals himself. The killer is none other than Glasgow Hardman, Tommy Flanagan. So yep, you better run. After he reveals himself, we get some really nice chase scenes and some foreshadowing that was built up throughout the movie. For example, she's hiding in the Botanic Gardens little garden inside the house, and earlier on we see the dial on it that can go to automatic, off and on, etc. And that kind of plays a role in them hiding and being found by the killer. It all came to a bit of an anticlimax at the finale, because the finale was so short. The kids got away, Jill was fighting against the killer for a couple of minutes, and then she eventually got away, and that was it. Now, other than that, we get this dream sequence in the hospital that seemed to be only there to bulk up the movie runtime itself, because the movie is quite short, and without the little dream sequence at the very end, then it would have been a lot shorter. But also I think it maybe plays on the part where if something like this happens to you, whether you catch the killer or not, whether they get away or not, it stays with you forever, and you may be scared for the rest of your life. But in this movie, the killer is caught. It would have been better if the killer got away, to be honest, like they did at the beginning of the film, just escaping and not knowing what happened to them. But the fact that they got caught should make her feel a little bit easier. Obviously what happened to her was very scary, but it should make her feel a bit easy knowing that he's not out there. But at the end of the day, it's just a movie. Overall, guys, it's not a bad movie at all, to be honest. Yes, it's quite a slow burn, not a lot of body count in it, not a lot of death scenes that you see in it, and not a lot happens in the film, but that's what I like about it. It's one of these films that give you a build up of what could be a jump scare, even if it's not a jump scare. It doesn't give you the cheap jump scares that you get in Hollywood today, or even back in 2006, because there is a lot of films like that back then. This one doesn't rely on the jump scares though, it relies on the tension, and I felt like the tension was just enough for this type of film. It's not a groundbreaking movie, it is a remake after all, and I'm not comparing it to the original. I just think that if you look at this film on its own merits, I think it was decent. I don't think it deserves the hate that it got back then. And to be honest, maybe it doesn't get the hate today that it got back in 2006. Quite similar to Black Christmas from 2006 as well. It's got that same style to it, only it's not set at Christmas. Same kind of character development as well. Same kind of killer hidden within the walls, etc. So I think maybe if you watch it today, if you've watched it before, you might appreciate it more today, possibly, than you did back in 2006. So what are your thoughts on this, guys? Have you seen it before? Did you see it back then? Did you see it now? And do you feel differently today than you did back then? Anyway, guys, as always, leave your comments down below. Let me know what you think, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.